Welcome back to ADA Interact. I'm Dominic Aouad. With the move back to level 1 restrictions, practitioners are looking for strategies and resources to bring existing patients back to their practice and restart promotion of dental services in our communities. Before the pandemic, some of the challenges in the marketing of dental services were communicating the value of preventative oral health and dental services being viewed as a discretionary spend. Now we're facing a significant downturn in the economy, and there is some fear in the community surrounding the safety of receiving dental treatment. Tonight, we have 3 experts in dental marketing who can help us devise strategies to overcome these challenges and give us some practical tips to start getting patients back in the chair. So joining us tonight, we have from Prime Practice, Brett Churnin, author and marketing specialist, Carolyn Dean, and joining us from Canberra, the savvy dentist, Dr Jessie Green. As always, you can send through your questions in the Ask the Question box on your screen. During each of these events, we've had thousands of questions come through, so if we don't get to yours tonight, don't worry. You can check out the ADA COVID-19 website or feel free to give us a call. Also, please remember to bookmark your ADA member portal as it's updated regularly. As there's a lot to cover tonight, we're going to move straight on to our discussion. So Brett, if we could start with you, could you give us an idea of the sorts of concerns that your clients are coming to you at the moment in terms of getting patients back in the chair and the sort of pushback they're getting from patients, whether they be new or existing for the practice?
Sure. First off, I want to share my favourite saying for the last couple of weeks, and that is that we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And for me, that's given some compassion to different people who are in different places. And that means practices, team members are in different spaces and different experiences around this. Patients are in different headspaces and different mindsets around this. And practice owners and practice managers are also in different places. So there's definitely no generic experience here. And the boats are different, So there are some practices that are seeing they're just really excited to be back, back doing what they love doing, back doing what they're good at. Team members are raring to go, and patient base has just been saying, can we just come in, And then there are others who are seeing it very much depends on the demographic, but seeing some hesitancy, some questions. Most patients are not like skipping and jumping, under normal sort of times to go and see the dentist. So even now, that sense of fear and the sense of uncertainty that has always been there for the patient base has been heightened. And there are fears and there are questions about safety and there are questions about, their health. So it's a very mixed bag, but I'm very clear, and I've been speaking to people this week that people are seeing their books filling up, and they're really excited to get back to work.
Yeah. We all are very excited. Carolyn, what have you started to notice in terms of the questions and comments that you're seeing coming through?
Okay, so similar to Brett, obviously I get purely marketing focused questions, but I'm seeing practices that are struggling and they're thinking, okay, well, what could I do differently? We've never been in these times before. This is a complete unknown. People don't know the right way to communicate. They don't know how to alleviate those fears that the patients obviously have. They don't know what to say to their teams. So there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of unknown, but also I'm seeing a lot of positivity. I'm seeing, huge relief that finally we're coming out of this. Finally, things will return to a new normal, and again, people keen to move forward. I'm seeing people, a lot of practices thinking beyond COVID and saying, okay, well, what do we really need to do to take the practice forward for the long term? So I've had a lot of conversations, probably in the last couple of weeks, even before level 1 was announced, with practices wanting to take it to the next step and thinking about, well, what can we do after COVID? What can we change? What can we improve on? So I'm seeing lots of great questions, lots of positive questions, but also, unknown fear, a whole range of emotions, different boats, as Brett said.
It's hard to be proactive when you don't know what the future holds.
Absolutely. There's no crystal balls, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. And Jessie, what are you noticing in the clinic?
Well, it's an interesting situation, Dom, because we're seeing exactly the same sorts of things that Brett and Carolyn have spoken about. And from the patients coming through, the clients that we work with, what they're telling us, and certainly what we're noticing in our own practice, is that a lot of patients are just happy to be able to get back and see their dentist. As Brett said, there are some patients who are really keen to come in and get the treatment that they know they need, and they're happy to get that done. There are different cohorts of patients, perhaps elderly patients who are a little more reluctant to come out just yet, and they're still wanting to stay at home. And of course, we need to understand that, and we need to meet them where they're at. But again, in the clinic, we're seeing teams that are generally happy to get, happy to be back at work, happy to be doing what they love to do, happy to be doing what they are really good at doing, what they've spent their life learning how to do, practicing doing that more and more and more, and developing those skills. So generally, I'd say the overwhelming sense is one of relief. But again, to touch on what Carolyn said as well, is that I think from what we're seeing in the practice as well, from the practice owners, is just looking a little bit beyond, looking into the future, what's on the horizon, what's over the horizon. And so I think that's going to be an interesting topic tonight as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that this is sort of shining a light on a whole bunch of different circumstances that we're in, combining what we did in the past and what we're going to do in the future. Carolyn, when people think about marketing, they think a lot about direct marketing. So whether that is direct to emails or texts or their website, what would your advice be to practices that didn't do a lot of that in the past? They're finding themselves in a situation now where they want to communicate with their patients more. What would you say are the sort of traps or landmines they should be aware of? Okay,
so if you're a practice and you've never done anything before, then number one, you need to understand the rules. You need to understand the guidelines, the APRA guidelines, the ACCC guidelines, anti-spam legislation. There's a lot that a practice needs to understand. I think I said earlier, received an email from a practice because obviously I'm on a lot of lists, or I'm on a lot of people's emails, and it was just an email from a practice saying, hey, we're open, but there was no unsubscribe here. They shouldn't have been sending the email. They shouldn't have sent an email where you can't unsubscribe. Mm. So if you are starting from scratch, I do recommend that you get the right advice from the right experts, really understand the legislation, and don't shoot from the hip. Really think about what you're trying to say, what you're trying to communicate. I think that the biggest guiding principle for this time is it's not about you, it's not about the practice, it's actually about the patients, and you need to understand what the patients want, and it's the fear, it's the concern. You need to answer the questions that they have. Please don't do promotions, don't push things, just be there. Be the guiding force, being the people that are listening to the patient's problems, and start building the relationship directly. So electronically, online, it's still a relationship, whether it's on a website, whether it's by text, whether it's social media, it's still a relationship, it's still a communication, and they need to listen. All practices need to listen to the emotions of their patients, and the emotion at the moment is fear and uncertainty, and they need to pitch their communication as such.
Yeah, sounds good. And so, Jessie, for teams that do engage in direct marketing, what sort of messages do you think are really important at this time to get to their communities?
I think it's one of understanding, Dom. I think when you think of marketing, we talk about the 3 M's of marketing. We talk about the market, the message, and the medium. And so getting that message right and having the right tone, the right empathy, the right words to say in the right way is going to be key. So I think really it's a case of understanding. We know where you're at. We understand that you might be afraid, you might be worried. We're here to help and support you. If you're coming to the dental practice, we already had super rigorous infection control protocols in place. And we've got additional protocols in place to protect the health and well-being of our patients, our team, and so on and so forth. So I think it's one of reassurance, one of trying to understand where people are at the moment, and just making them feel, comfortable to come into the dental practice and being able to put their concerns to one side and address them. So I think it's really about empathy. It's really about trying to meet them where they're at. And I think just getting that tone right is going to be key. Sometimes it's not even what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that's going to be really key, that the way you deliver that message, whether that's direct marketing or whether it's the spoken word, the tone is everything.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jesse. And I think that brings us on to another really key point, that the teams, often it's the team that's going to be receiving the phone call or talking to the patient or being the first touch point.
Yeah.
What would your advice be for dental teams, Brett, in terms of the communication they're having with patients at the moment?
Yeah, I was going to sort of, on the back of what Jesse was saying, I always say expectation is the mother of all suffering, So if people have mismanaged expectations around what's going to happen, then that creates disharmony, and a dissonance for the patient. And we don't want that, So I think it's really important to manage people's expectations around the experience that they're going to get. Some would say that infection prevention is the new patient experience, and I think that that's got to be a big part of it. And, it's like, well, if the patient experience, like when I come into the practice, if there are things that are going to change about my experience, and I'm talking really to existing patient experience now, if that existing patient experience is going to change, then it really helps me as a patient to be informed beforehand that that's what's going to happen. So, taking videos of like, this is what to expect, and this is what will happen when we greet you, and this is why we wear this, and this is why we do this. And we would normally sit you down in the reception area, but we can't do that at the moment. The more the teams can have a sense of confidence in why we're doing things differently and how we're doing things differently. And as Jesse said as well, all we're doing is we've always had these precautions in place, and now we've taken it up a notch. And if we can confidently communicate that to our patient base and let them know that the positive experience that they always got with us, that's going to continue to occur. It might look different. It might, the way things happen might be a little bit different, but we've got you. From the moment you call. And so it's great to market it and to put it on the website and to let people know. But then when they call the practice, whoever's answering the phones has to be confident in relaying that message. And when they're greeted with the dental assistant has to feel that way. And so it's very important now to be taking this time to work with your team on their communication skills and their systems and the protocols that are in place so that the patient feels that we've got that they're taken care of.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So Carolyn, what are the ways in which we can communicate with our patients? Questions come through talking about picking up the phone and talking to them.
Yep.
So obviously that's a really good one. It's a familiar voice. It's very time consuming and expensive. Yeah. What are the other ways we can communicate with our patients to get these messages out there?
Okay. My answer to that is every way that you can, every channel that you can. It takes 7 to 11 times for a message to get through. So, think about your team or think about your children even. You need to say things 7 to 11 times for it to land. Your patients are the same. So my recommendation is pick your channels wisely, but if you've got social media and you're active on social media, then, as Brett said, having a video saying, okay, this is us and PPE, this is what we're doing, this is what you'll see when you're greeted, this is how we're going to take you through, every single channel. So social media, lots of people are on social media at the moment, so it's a really good way of getting that message across. Email newsletters, obviously different media has a different voice. So email newsletters, you can say this is what we're going to do. You can even embed a video in there, but step them through the process so that they understand. Make it in your tone of voice. If you're cool and a relaxed practice, then make sure that your email communication, your written word, mirrors your verbal word. If you're a very professional, very tight, slick organization, then again, your messaging needs to match that. So email newsletters, put it on your website. I've seen pretty much every website, thank goodness, that dentists have. They've all got their COVID announcements. They've all got their pages. It's really great. But really important is you need to make sure that you're changing the messages as as restrictions change. Make sure, guys, that if you have changed your opening hours, if you have changed statements on your website, if you do have things on social media, if you've been updating your Google My Business listings, and I hope you have, make sure that everything is up to date. Make sure that everything is on message. SMSs is another great way of being able to do personalized messages, which is kind of one step up from phone calls, but you can be kind of personalized but in bulk. So my recommendation is you've got people that you've cancelled or people that you maybe rescheduled to August, September, thinking it would go on to them. You can send a personalized text message, pull out those patients and say, hey, just to let you know, we are actually open at the moment. I know we rescheduled you to August, September. We can see you now. Please let us know. So you can be personalized with SMS, but you can cover far more than a good phone call. But obviously phone calls matter. Phone calls are always the most personal, but at the moment, we're playing a numbers game. So my answer is as many channels as you can.
A question has just come through, Jessie, about patients that are concerned about a second wave of infection. And I suppose some of it has to do with safety. But then on the other hand, I suppose do I need to come in quickly to get this done? How are you balancing that messaging in your practice or with your advice that you're giving out?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one because, of course, we're all worried about the second wave, and we're all worried about making sure we adhere to the guidelines that are out there. And certainly, just as a small observation, I was walking around the lake here in Canberra the other day, and social distancing seemed to have been forgotten rather quickly. And so I guess the first thing we've got to do is make sure we're all doing the right thing ourselves. So I think around that, really, the communication is pretty straightforward in the sense that. For those people that are concerned about a second wave, we're trying to reassure them. And again, it's the same message. We have always had these super rigorous infection control protocols. Yeah. We've got these additional, protocols in place. We're taking it to another level again. And of course, we sail the wind that we've got, as a friend of mine says, and that is, we make the best decisions we can with the information that we have at hand. And at the moment, the best information at hand is that the guidelines from the AHPPC are such that we can move to level 1 restrictions. We can provide dental care in a safe environment. And really, Mrs. Smith, if you've got that treatment, we've got to weigh up the risk of that caries or whatever the issue is progressing and becoming an issue, or delaying that and seeing if we're going to wait and take decide which way you want to go. And ultimately, what we try and do with the patients, and most of our patients that we've encountered in our own practice and those with our other clients, as I said, most of them have been fairly circumspect and been able to say, based on the current evidence, I'm happy to proceed. And again, there's some cohorts, who I said earlier, who are more reluctant to. And so it's the same communication, it's that same reassurance, it's that same empathy, it's that same trying to put people's mind at ease. Could I just add something to the marketing though, Dom? I just wanted to ask, just to add, just something that I thought might be helpful as well, just as another little tool for the ADA members. And this is probably going to sound a little contrary or perhaps what some people are used to, but one of the things I think it might be another useful thing, and Carolyn mentioned all channels, which I think is really sound advice, but another channel that might be worth considering is the physical snail mail newsletter. And the reason I think that's worthwhile considering is, yes, it costs some money, yes, there's some postage involved, but I don't know about what your inbox looks like, Dom, but mine's pretty full these days. Yeah. And my mailbox at home is pretty empty.
Yeah.
So in terms of cut through, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I've pretty much stopped opening anything that says COVID on it. It's just too depressing.
No, I know.
I've just had a question come through regarding market segments, Carolyn. So I suppose the idea behind the question is that different segments of the market or different demographics consume information in different ways.
Yeah, sure.
Is this why the advice is every channel?
Yeah, consider every channel, obviously. So if your target market are retirees, probably don't spend a lot of time on Instagram. You need to think about your target market. You need to think about your demographics. But the overarching advice is consider all channels. But absolutely, you need to consider your patients and what they are consuming. And yeah, absolutely right. What Jesse's just said, print media still lands. It's just what I'm seeing at the moment is time. I think we're scrambling, all of us, on, okay, well, these are the new restrictions. This is what it means. What do we need to do? How do we act? And trying to move communication around in a very short time frame and getting the messages right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing as a bigger challenge.
Time management, when control is taken away from you, is certainly very hard.
Yeah.
Brett, which actually brings us on to the next question. I think teams, as you said, everyone's in different ships at the moment, so teams are at different stages. But what would your advice be to a team that has a little bit more time at the moment?
Yeah.
And what would your advice be to a team that is very overwhelmed at the moment? How would you tackle both of those teams?
So on the back of what Jesse was talking about there, I was thinking about, if I had a team member, for example, who really didn't feel comfortable to come into the practice still, but they're on JobKeeper and they're getting paid. One of the things you could do is say, listen, I've got these flyers. Why don't you do a walk around the area and drop these in? We've had a lot of our practices, because we've got like this whole video library, getting into that video library and accessing those videos, and those team members being able to train your team in times like this when there's downtime. Now is the time. I mean, our business, just like Jesse's, is all about working on the business rather than in the business, And so while we couldn't work in the business, that was the perfect time to work on the business. Some did, and some didn't know how. But I still think that the teams and owners can still have that capacity to be able to look at, well, how do we engage the team a little bit more? How do we train the team in some areas, in soft skills, in questioning, in handling difficult questions, and how do we keep the team engaged? Keep on having those Zoom meetings if everyone's dispersed, and working from home. How do we make sure that once a week, even the prime team, like on a Friday afternoon at 5:00, we have drinks on via Zoom. Those sorts of things to keep each other engaged, and together, and in some sort of harmony. As for those ones what was the second part of the question?
The teams that are overwhelmed at the moment.
Yes.
What would your advice be for them? In terms of the leadership and in terms of the team members themselves.
Yeah.
How would you advise them to structure or prioritize their time when they feel like they're over inundated with a backlog of patients?
It's a tricky one for owners because the key words that come to my mind are empathy and compassion, and yet when you've got a practice and you're watching your production has just done this massive dive and your expenses are still up here, that creates a lot of stress for business owners. And so it's really like this balance. How do I have compassion and empathy for my team members, and especially the ones who've got kids who are at and they're trying to homeschool, and people are juggling balls that they've never had to juggle before, So I think empathy and compassion is there, but also clear direction. Sometimes what's required in times of uncertainty is to give your team some clarity about what is required, what does good look like, what are the things that you can get them to do. We always talk about delegating things to team members, giving things away, and practice owners are often reticent to do that because it's like, well, nobody can do it as good as me.
Yeah.
But then all that happens is you get this key person dependency happening where it's all on the owner or even all on the manager, and that's stressful and it's exhausting and it's overwhelming. So it's like, empower the team members, get them engaged, give them jobs, give them tasks, but also at the same time really think and ask them, like, where are you at? Can you take this on? Like, where's your mindset? Where's your framework here? Are you able to do this? Because I'd love you to do it. So it's a tricky one.
It really is. Jesse, what do you think we learned, or what do you think were the biggest lessons we've had having gone up to level 3 and now back down to level 1 restrictions? I suppose, what have you observed, or what would even you be thinking differently should we escalate again? How would you prioritize, or how would you advise to prioritize the time differently, so that way the practice was in a better position for when we could get back to work?
Yeah, look, there's a few key things I think we need to focus on, Dom. In terms of the COVID situation, and it's probably the same with other crises that have been in the past and will no doubt come again, hopefully not to this scale though. In terms of focusing, one of the things that people that know me will know that I talk about retention of patients all the time, and so I like to talk about the active retention of patients. And the active retention of patients really comes through a combination of things. It's about relationships, of course. It's about outbound communication. It's about content that engages, making sure our database is managed and so on. So I think in terms of getting things ready, I think making sure we're actively retaining our patients, building those relationships, making deposits in what I would call the relationship love bank account. And so that, we're constantly building that relationship, because relationship equals retention, basically. And beyond that, I think really, other things that I'd be focusing the team on would be training. There's a wonderful expression that sports teams train a whole lot more than they compete, yet in business we compete a whole lot more than we train. Perhaps we can redress some of that. And of course, then there's building out your standard operating procedures and so on. But I think one of the things around all of that, one of the things that's been learned out of this, and there's plenty of lessons. I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I've thought about. I'm sure Brett and Carolyn will have their others as well. But the practice that you went into COVID with doesn't have to be the practice you come out with.
Absolutely.
So my thinking around that is going, okay, well, we had this practice beforehand. Do we want to rinse and repeat everything we did before? Because now we've got that wonderful opportunity to hit a reset button, to think about how we might like to do that differently, and then put the structures in place to make those changes. So coming back to, I don't know if I've wandered off course, and I apologize if I have, but I think there's an opportunity to really look at what we want to take out of this and move forward with, and it doesn't have to be back to the future. It can be leaning into a brighter future indeed.
No, we were talking before about Jesse, about this idea that what's happened now is that this has shone a real light on all of us, on our family life and our practice life, and maybe that light is a good light, and maybe it's actually shone a light on, okay, well, our systems aren't in place and our team aren't engaged, or my leadership is lacking a little bit, or the harmony is not there, or maybe the patient experience isn't as good as it could be. And so now it's like that's the opportunity, I think, that Jess is talking about, is we can make some changes here. There are some really amazing opportunities that people are starting to see, if they're willing to do the work, but it definitely takes a bit of work.
Yeah. So I've got a good question here, and Carolyn, we'll go around the table with this, but is now a good time to invest in marketing? So when you look at sort of now compared to other times, is now immediately post-crisis a good time to invest in marketing? And if budgets are tight, where would you prioritise? Okay. So two-phase question there.
So when I work with practices, I'm always very aware that there are a lot of things that a practice can do with very little money and a whole ton of effort, So there's things that they can do if they're time rich and cash poor. So now I think, absolutely. I doubt if there are many practices out there that have got a huge amount of cash just waiting to be spent on marketing. So I do believe it's important to, make the most of the opportunity to really look at, exactly what Jesse said, exactly what Brett said, to look at their marketing and actually say what's working, what isn't working, what needs to be changed, but what can we do now? What can we do that's got very low cost and very low impact? And then plan for the future and say, okay, well, when our revenue hits this point, then we can bring this in. So yes, I think everybody should be marketing. And I think that I've seen quite a few practices that went, crikey, I need to stop everything. And it's like, you can't stop everything. You can't stop communicating with your patients. It's absolutely critical. It's more critical than ever that you communicate with your patients. So do not stop marketing. Yeah. Obviously, you may need to reallocate the spend of your marketing. You need to reallocate the focus, but absolutely do not stop. Communication is critical.
Thank you. What would your advice be, Brett, to an associate dentist or a non-dentist owner in terms of what can they use to ensure that they're getting patients back in their book or rebooking? What are the sort of messages they should be getting to their patients when they're in the chair?
Yeah, I was talking to a non-owner dentist just recently, and I was just amazed at how proactive he was in building his patient base from the perspective of like, these are like creating those relationships, being in communication with them, making sure that they're coming back. If he had to get on the phone, to let them know and what's happening, then he would do that, taking his own videos, especially if the practice owner is not proactive around those things, to not wait for, obviously you're restricted in some ways about what you can do, but you're not restricted about what you do in your treatment room. You're not restricted in terms of what you can communicate to your patients. You're not restricted in learning those great communication skills and those relationship building skills. Once the patient comes in, how do I build rapport with that patient? How do I bridge that gap between what the patient walks in thinking they need and what I, as the dentist, think they need, which is usually a big gap. They're the things that a non-owner dentist can absolutely work on. And in addition, they're seen as leaders of the practice as well, so they can also start working on their leadership skills and their communication with their dental assistant and the other team members as well. There's so much that can be done.
Thanks, Brett. A few compliments coming through on your drink bottle. A couple of people have asked if they're vases, but mostly compliments coming through on that.
Thank you. Actually, I just bought it for my wife today for our 10th anniversary. It was just like an extra present, but I thought I'd start using it. Sorry, Vanessa. It works really well.
I hope she's not watching. Thank you, everybody, for the questions that are coming through. There are a lot coming through, but please keep them coming. Lots of interesting ones now and coming up. Jesse, patients that are sort of older than 70 and really wary, what is the advice that your team is giving the patients, or when they're coming in, what advice are you giving them?
Well, again, it's kind of going back to what we spoke about earlier, Dom, and in essence, it's about if they're coming in, then of course we need to make sure that they're fit and they're well. They're not meeting the epidemiological criteria around COVID. So we want to make sure that they're fit and well and they're able to come in, and that we're not going to ask them to come out into the community and put themselves in harm's way. So when we're calling them, we're confirming or we're asking them about appointments, we're obviously triaging and asking questions around how well they are, what their general medical conditions are like, and so on, just making sure that they're comfortable. So we're doing a bit of triage as we're on the telephone around that. As they come in, of course, we're like we've spoken about already, we're just reinforcing the fact and communicating the fact that we've got these additional protocols in place, which will put them at ease, and to let them know that we're taking their health and well-being really, really seriously. And of course, from the treatment perspective, perhaps we're not going to embark on, super complex treatment. We might be doing just what we need to address active disease and to address other more complicated treatment down the track. So for those people who are in a higher risk category, we're still perhaps being a little circumspect about the sorts of treatments that we would, suggest that those patients undertake. And we're going to push some of that treatment out for a little while until they're happy, they're confident, they're well. And of course, hopefully there is a general a situation across the community where COVID is less of an issue than it is, and we can be more confident around some of those things. Now, that's even with the level 1 restrictions. I think we're all feeling more comfortable and confident than we were a few weeks ago. But nonetheless, that over 70s demographic is probably feeling a little more vulnerable than others, and that's okay. So we need to meet them where they're at. So I think that's really key. So that's how we're addressing that.
If I could add to that as well, I was thinking as well that if we're saying the same message and we're saying it over and over again, one of the dangers that can happen with that is that our level of care and empathy can drop sometimes. And I think it's really important for the team to really, like every patient that I'm speaking to, especially those ones that you're just talking about now, that we use the same tone, and that they get that feeling that they're a unique person with unique needs, not that, this is the 10th time that I've said it today and I'm saying the same spiel each time and I've got this script, rather that, no, I'm speaking to you as a human being, and we care for you, and that takes something for the team. So I think we need to really acknowledge the team members who are on those phones. It's a big job, but the people who are on the phones are there for a reason, and it's really essential because that experience for them, for those patients, it's happening on those phones. And that'll make or break how they walk into the practice when they finally do walk in.
Yeah, sure. Carolyn,
just on that.
Yes, sorry, Jesse. Yes.
Sorry, mate. I was just going to just comment on what Brett was saying as well. And I think there's a lot to be said for that front desk role.
Yeah.
That front desk role, I think, is perhaps the one of the toughest roles in the whole practice. And they're often the ones juggling multiple priorities, whether it's a phone call, a patient coming to check in, to check out, and all the rest of it. So I think Brett mentioned it earlier, and I'd certainly agree with the point that the time spent investing and training that particular role, all roles, of course, but I think Brett mentioned it earlier, but that's a particularly important role. And I think it's a complicated role. And it's one that requires a lot of swapping of hats and context switching around that. And so having someone who's highly skilled and the ability to not just say the words, because anyone can teach a script, but to be able to deliver those words with nuance, with care, with empathy, I think is again so critical.
Totally.
Thank you, Jesse. I've had a question come through, Carolyn, and I'm not sure if there'll be a disagreement around the table around this, but for a dental practice, what percentage of revenue should they be looking at spending on marketing?
Okay, it depends on what they want to do. Okay, so if they are they're trying to attract a whole ton of new patients, they're brand new practice, or they've expanded the practice, or they've got a new associate in and they need to fill the books. Yeah. We're talking 8 to 10% of their target revenue. I mean, obviously COVID is different times, but as a standard, 8 to 10% if you are in rapid growth mode. Most practices, they want to retain existing patients, they want to attract new patients, as standard, and that's somewhere between 4 to 6%. And if you are a very lucky practice that you just need to retain your existing patients, then it's 2 to 4% of your goal revenue.
Thank you. Brett, anything to add on that?
Yeah, my heart sort of jumped when you said 8 to 10%, but I guess, it really just does depend, like I agree,
If you've got a brand new practice,
if you've got a brand new practice and no patients, I mean, you've got to put that time in it. But I think we like to get them down to sort of the 2 to 4% or 1 to 3%, we would say, but somewhere around that level when we're trying to sort of sustain things and maybe build slowly. But yeah, it could be up to that 8 to 10%. But if it's going to be up 8 to 10%, you want to be really clear that the money that you're spending is giving you a return. So you got to be tracking it. Where are those new patients coming in? How much are you diagnosing for those patients? How much are they actually accepting? Is that marketing initiative actually working? And if it's not working, get rid of it. Yeah. And looking at those numbers and tracking those numbers, that is not a natural place for most of the dentists that I work with. There's training around those numbers and looking at not just the marketing numbers, but all the numbers. Yeah.
Jesse, if you could answer that, so if you could follow on from that and also consider this other question that's come through, because I think it's quite pertinent. It's asking, we're a new practice in our first 4 months before COVID hit. How do we look at rebooting? So if you could answer the revenue question and that one as a follow-on.
Yeah. So I think the real answer for me comes back to return on investment. And again, different practices, different stages of growth, they're going to be spending different proportions on marketing. To touch on Brett's point, knowing those numbers is critical. I would say that not many dentists that I know are cognizant of what their cost of acquisition is. And so ultimately, if you don't know what your cost of acquisition is and you don't know what you're diagnosing out of that first exam, if you don't know what that first appointment's worth and what the treatment plan on the end of that is worth, it's really hard for you to know how much you can spend on a marketing budget. If you go to someone like Carolyn or to an external marketing agency, there's a couple of key pieces of data that I think you can give them that make their job that much easier. Like if you can go to Carolyn or to whomever you might use and say, Carolyn, in the past, my costs of acquisition has been $50 a patient. My new patient exam and x-rays and cleans is, whatever it is, $250. And then my average treatment plan off the back of that is $1,500, $2,000, whatever the numbers are. That gives Carolyn something to work with. She can construct a marketing plan around that, look at the cost, the ad spend and all those other things, and make some intelligent decisions around that. So again, you've got to know those numbers. It's really key. The other thing I would say around that is marketing really has 3 branches to it. You've got to recruit new patients, retain patients, and reactivate patients. So I think that it's all good to say how much should we spend on marketing. But again, I think advertising is one subset of marketing. It's not marketing in itself. So I think we've got to look at the three branches. So speaking to that particular practice owner that is 4 months into their new practice, is it a brand new practice, as in like, or is it they've just owned it for 4 months?
No,
What's the circumstance?
it sounds like it's a brand new practice.
If that's a brand new practice, I mean, candidly, that's pretty tough, right? They're gonna need to be looking at their database, who's on their database, trying to get as many of those people in complete treatment, following all those sorts of things through really, really well. They're going to need to be turning on their marketing taps, and hopefully they've got a bit of money tucked aside that they can do that. But I would say that for those people, they're going to need to be thinking a little bit outside the square as well. I'd be looking at what partnerships they could be developing. Totally. How can they leverage someone else's database? Who else in the neighbourhood is looking after that ideal patient that they're trying to attract to their practice, and just thinking a little bit more than Facebook ads and PPC on Google. I think we've got to look a little bit beyond that. What sort of corporate partnerships could we put together? All sorts of ideas, and again, you're only limited by imagination, of course, but I think they're going to need to think a little more laterally than straight advertising, and then making sure that everything that they've got currently, they get as much out of as they possibly can, from a marketing and business sense, of course, within the realms of level 1 and all that means.
Yeah, I was thinking, like you said, out of the box, and I'd be door knocking. We were talking before about maybe, I think through this crisis, there's practices out there who are done. This has really pushed them over the edge. And I'd be knocking on some doors of some colleagues and saying, the local ones, and saying, look, are you staying in business, or can we talk? Is that on the table? I'd be looking at someone else's patient base. I mean, you could do other things like creating relationships with all of the people in the neighbourhood and health alliances and the GPs in the local area and the cafes, and starting to work with those people, because the more you can work with them, the more they talk about you to their patients. But if you really want to ramp it up, that's probably the best way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to layer on top of that and absolutely agree with everything that Brett and Jessie said, but I will bring it back to basics as well. They need to have the right foundations in place. Okay, so I have been to numerous dental practices where they've spent literally more on their printer than they have on their website, and they think that's okay. So, people need to understand, practices need to understand that people are going to look at their website,
and not at their printer.
And not at their printer. They're never going to get to see the printer, or the receptionist or the beautiful chairs if you haven't done the foundations right. So if the website is not the best, if it doesn't talk about their points of difference, if it doesn't show the team in the right light, if it looks like every other practice, or if it looks like it's been done by their cousin or nephew, start there. Really, because if you are door knocking, if you're putting flyers out, people are still going to look at you online. Yes. So make sure your foundations are right. Only been up for 4 months, they probably don't have any reviews, but check out your reviews, see what people are saying. If it's positive, absolutely great. If it's negative, if you have got if the receptionist is not, skilled up and that's showing on your reviews, fix that, fix the basics as well. So absolutely, think about all of the out of left field opportunities, but make sure that their foundations are absolutely squeaky clean, because they've got to invest in that first before doing, my belief, any other form of marketing. If your foundations aren't good, you're going to waste time and effort on any other type of marketing.
Thank you. It's all really good advice. Jessie, I'll invite you in on the next big topic, and a few questions have come in on this, pricing. So our revenue's gone down, the cost of operating has gone up. So naturally you would think that the tendency is to put the prices up. However, there's a downturn in the economy and the consumer sentiment isn't there. So is now the time we should be discounting? What is your thought on pricing and what we should be doing at this time and moving forward?
So I'm going to say that there's no one size fits all answer on this, Dom, and every person's going to need to make their own decision. So I can just give you a personal perspective on that, and certainly what we've found with the clients that we work with, that's been working well for them, and certainly in our practice. In our practice, we've not adjusted our prices, and we haven't felt the need to do that. And of course, your pricing structure reflects a lot of different things. It's not just your cost structure. Your pricing represents your brand. It represents the degree of investment you've made in your equipment. It represents a heap of things, more than just that. So there's not going to be one size fits all answer for everything. So of course, as you think about your fees, you're going to need to consider your margins. You're going to need to consider your profitability. You're going to need to consider keeping some cash flow aside for future potential problems. And we haven't spoken about cash flow tonight, but I think that's a massive topic we should talk about. But again, fee structures around that, I don't think you can just say, it's a tough time, I'm going to drop my prices. Because my experience is when you cut your prices, mate, that's not a race you want to win, because invariably, let me tell you a great story. There's a great story. This is probably just going to sound a little glib, and I don't mean it to sound glib, but it illustrates the point. There's two barbers. One barber, he's been there forever and he's doing $20 haircuts. And the new barber comes next door and he says, I'm going to do haircuts for 15. The original barber sees this and thinks, oh gosh, I'll do mine for 10. And then the new barber says, oh gosh, I'm going to do mine for 5. Then all of a sudden the old barber gets a bit sick of this and says, look, we fix $5 haircuts. And so in all of that, I guess the point is you can keep running to the bottom of the market, but you don't want to be the one that gets there first. All right. And so my point in this is you've got to look at your margins, you've got to look at your cost structures, you've got to look at your brand, you've got to look at all these things and determine a price structure that represents fair value for the consumer, that allows you to operate in a commercially sustainable way. And I don't think we can just blanketly say don't cut prices or do cut prices. I think there's going to need to be consideration across individual practices in those areas.
Thank you, Jesse. I think you beautifully described the basis of ethical business, and that's really the foundation of how every practitioner wants to behave. Obviously, they want to have a commercially viable practice, but they want to service their communities in an ethical way, and price is just one part of that. So, Jesse, you mentioned measuring the success of your marketing. If I'll come back to you at the end, Carolyn, if you want to address that. So
Sure.
When we're looking at the marketing or the money that we're spending on getting messages out there, what are the different ways we can measure whether or not that is successful?
Okay, good old-fashioned spreadsheet is how you measure it. You need to track and measure as much as you can. With the practices that we work with, it's kind of everything that can be measured should be measured. But for a beginner, I guess, what would I look at? I would look at the return on investment. So it needs to be a 3-to-1 return on investment for that to be a successful piece of marketing. So for every $1 in, it should, $1 spent, $1 out should be $3 into the practice. Okay, so if it's not doing a 3-to-1 return on investment, then you need to look. So I'm not a fan of saying, okay, it didn't work, let's stop it. Because marketing takes trial and error, it needs refining. I speak to so many practices that say, okay, I tried social media for a week, or I did one email newsletter, and nothing works for me. The message needs to be refined over time.
It's like everything, really, consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's absolutely knowing your numbers. When we work with the practices, we're sitting down and we're looking at their numbers on a monthly basis, and on a quarterly basis. It's really reviewing and asking those questions of, whether it's working, what needs to change, would we continue with that? Some things are quite obviously, not working. And sometimes, you can say, okay, well, let's stop it. But most things need to be considered. You need to have, the story around it. Why didn't it work? Was it because you did a great promotion, but actually you didn't tell the team about it? And so when somebody phoned up, nobody knew about it. There's normally a reason why things don't work. And it's numbers is one side, but you need to understand the business. You need to understand your patients. I speak to so many practices that are not watching any of their marketing dollars. There's a lot of fear with practices where they said, well, we've been running the same ad in the local newspaper for the last 2 years. And I'll say, well, have you ever checked that? And they will say, well, no, but we're too scared to stop it because it might be working. So, absolutely need to know your numbers. The other number that's really important, for a beginner, is the average lifetime value of a patient. And knowing, just following on from what Jesse said earlier, you need to know acquisition cost, but you need to know how much a patient is worth to your practice over the average lifetime that they spend with you.
And if I could add to that, I think, and adding to what Jesse said earlier, practice owners really need to have a sense about some clarity around their cash flow. It's not just this month, and start to look at how do I get on top of these numbers and project it for the next 6 to 12 months. And to get because without that clarity around, what's going to be left in the bank, then it's very difficult for practice owners to make good business decisions. So it's about understanding those numbers so that then I can plan for it, and then I can say, okay, good, then I'll put this amount of money away for my marketing at that point there, and then I'll put this amount, and that's a complex thing. You've got to know what's coming in, you've got to know what's going out, you've got to know what's left. And so it's doable, but you've got to start with the spreadsheet, and then you've got to have those eyes for it. And be able to look at the numbers, analyze the story behind the numbers, and then look at, well, what actions do we need to take that will shift those numbers to make sure that there's, the cash flow is okay at the end of the month. And then you can make accurate decisions around your marketing or any spend, really.
That's fantastic. Jesse, what key things are you measuring with the success of marketing and communicating with patients?
Look, pretty much the same thing as everyone else has said, but just to pick up on the point around cash flow, I think having good understanding of where your money is going, what's coming in, what's going out, is key, because when emotions are high, and they can be high at periods like this, intelligence is generally a bit low. And so what we want to try and do is use evidence-based business. We talk about evidence-based dentistry all the time. And so we want to use evidence-based dentistry, evidence-based business. And that's really what I think we're all saying is you've got to know your numbers, you've got to know where your money's going, what it's doing. But in terms of looking at return on investment from a marketing thing, I probably have a slightly higher bar than 3 to 1, because when you look at the cost-based structure in a practice, for me, 3 to 1's a bit skinny, but that's fine. But what I really think, and the other thing that I find a little bit hard is we look at 3-year patient value. And one of the things that we look at is understanding retention maths. And retention maths is really important around this as well, because typically what we know is some of the ratios around spend over year 1, 2, and 3. And typically, if a patient spends, if a patient spends, say, let's just use a random number, $500 in their first year at the practice, an exam, clean, couple of bite-wings, maybe a scale and clean, whatever else. In year 2, they're typically going to spend 1.8 to 2 times that, so give or take $1,000. And in year 3, about 1.5 times year 2. So again, what we've got to look at is understanding that the marketing system has to work as a whole. It's not just going, I'm getting a 3 to 1 spend on that. I've got to look at my retention systems, because then my cost of acquisition actually is halved if I can, get a referral, a word of mouth referral off that, patient that we spent some money on, and all those other things come together. So the thing with retention maths is if we're not retaining those patients for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, if we lose them after year 1, we only get 1/6 of the revenue that we would have got in 3 years. If we lose them after year 2, we get about half of that 3-year spend, and obviously we keep them for the 3 years and beyond. We get 1+. So I think we've got to look at marketing as a system. We've got to look at it holistically. Yes, we've got to use our numbers. We're all in furious agreement on that. But I think we've got to look at it systematically. Recruit, retain, reactivate. Again, they all kind of come together. So, but again, having that data allows you to make good decisions. Good decisions takes the stress out of things and clarity of mind.
Got a good question here regarding community Facebook groups, and also a secondary question regarding the use of third-party sites like Whitecoat or third-party booking sites as well. So do you have any thoughts about, firstly, community Facebook groups, and secondly, third-party booking or review sites? Okay,
so my view on community Facebook groups is absolutely be on there. We're in Willoughby now. There's Willoughby Living, which is about 50,000 people. And so on community Facebook groups, there will be quite frequently a request saying, moved into the area, or even I've got a dental emergency, who can people recommend? So we all know that word of mouth has always been the number one way that patients find a practice. It's exactly the same, but what's happening now is word of mouth is moving online. So community Facebook groups is exactly this. This is word of mouth online now. So my recommendation is absolutely get on there, watch, see what people are asking. And if people are saying, hey, I've got a dental emergency, you can respond and say, hey, this is Dr. Joe. Look, really happy to talk about this. I can see you tomorrow, or you can give my mobile phone a ring, I'll message you. Or if it's, recommendation for a new practice, we've just moved into the area, respond, but respond in a tone that's appropriate to you, to your practice, and to the groups, and say, look, we're in the next suburb, you might want to come and visit us. This is what, we specialise in. This is how we meet our patients. This is how we treat our patients. So Facebook groups, yes, absolutely. Be on them, for sure.
And we just got a question through as how you measure word of mouth. Is this just on a new patient form? They just fill out, how did you hear about us? Is that how everyone is getting their information?
Absolutely. So when we work with practices, it's really interesting. And I'm sure that Brett's practices are nothing like this, but quite often the practices aren't tracking where patients are coming from. And if they are, they're not accurate. It comes straight back to having the systems in place. We've seen numbers where we start tracking over the months, and the numbers have no pattern. And what's happened is basically the front desk has been asked to track the numbers, and they're literally just randomly ticking on, something that they think is valid. So, it's really important that the team is trained. You obviously need to have the right fields set up in your practice management software, but it really comes down to team training for them asking the right questions. If you've got a team that's motivated and they want to know this, and you're recognising them and you're looking at these numbers, then they're going to be far more motivated than thinking, well, I'm just ticking a box and nobody's ever going to look at it.
Thank you. Brett, what would you say to a practice, and there have been a couple that have made comments or questions coming through saying they've never done any of this marketing stuff, and so far things have been going great. Should they be worried?
Should they be worried?
Yeah. Should they be worried they're not on board with this stuff?
Look, I guess you just, again, sorry to keep on harping on it, but just understand your numbers. Like if you're getting the right number of new patients for your patient, for the number of dentists that you've got in the practice, then no, you shouldn't be worried. If you're tracking those new patients, because we always talk about, tracking the 011s rather than the 013s. And a lot of people are focused on those new patient emergencies, but unless you're converting those emergency new patient exams into a proper comprehensive new patient exam, then it's like, well, they've come, you've got them out of pain, and now they're gone. Yeah. You lost that opportunity. But if you're getting the right number of 011s every single day for the number of dentists that are on, then you're good. And again, it depends on, are you an established practice who has the right number of patients for the number of dentists that you've got on board, or the number of clinicians you've got on board, and if you don't know those numbers, you've got to find out those numbers, or are you actually a bit short? And you want to keep that other clinician, but you know that you've really got to do some work to lift the patient numbers. It depends.
Sorry, Jesse, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I think it's just coming back to that particular scenario. Should I be worried? Again, I think as Brett said so eloquently, it just depends. If you've got enough patients to support your practice, then great, giddy up. And if you don't, then maybe worry. But you've got to know the number, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carolyn, I just have a clarification question coming through. How do you specifically measure word of mouth? Is it just a tick box word of mouth, or is there a way you sort of look more at that?
You can drill down and you can say word of mouth and who was it. So if they have a name, they will say Brett, or they will say, can't remember, it was Willoughby Living Facebook group. So it comes down to the questions that you think, what level do you want to know? What level of granularity do you want to see word of mouth? It's up to the practice. It's back to the numbers. How much do you want to know?
Correct. And then it's like, well, the next level can also be, what was it that they said about us that made you actually contact us? I think that's valuable information. They told me that you guys are on time every time.
Yes.
Well, good. I want to know that information because I'm going to be on time for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Jesse.
So just on those numbers as well, one of the things I think is really useful to think about is leading indicators versus lagging indicators. New patients are a lagging indicator, and it's an important indicator, but it's a lagging indicator. What I think is a useful metric in the marketing space to be looking at, as well as the leading indicator, how many times am I asking for referrals? How many times am I posting on social media? How many times am I doing whatever? So you've got to look at the activities that drive those outcomes. And we're talking about new patient flow, which is critically important for many practices. But I think we've got to step back as well and look at the numbers and the metrics around the activities that lead to the outcomes and measure those as well. So identify the outcome, or identify the activities that produce those outcomes, leading indicators versus lagging indicators. You've got to measure both.
Sure. Sorry, Carolyn, just getting a clarification on third-party sites. Mm-hmm. So what were your final thoughts on that?
So you're talking about online booking
Health
sites
Engine,
and
Health Direct.
Whitecoat.
Yeah.
Ooh, good question. What is my view? My view, I know it's the same theme. It's the numbers.
Yeah.
It's the numbers. So online booking sites, I'll talk to that one, I guess. My belief, and throw it open to the floor, is all practices need to have online booking now. It's absolutely critical. You're going to miss out on patients if you cannot offer online bookings. And given where we are now in the world, emergency dental treatment, people need to be able to book into a practice in the hours that they want to. And the reality is very few people in a regular world don't actually have the time or inclination to book between 8:30 and 5:30. They want to book it online. So online booking sites, what's my belief? My belief is it comes down to the numbers. It comes down to, are you paying per patient acquisition, and could you have acquired that patient any other way? If you do have practice management software, if you do have online booking, it needs to be front and center of your marketing, should be front and center of your website. Hopefully you will get that patient through an alternative route, and they will book online on your website. And online booking sites absolutely have a place. If you're in a really busy suburb, their site, the online booking site, may be ranked much higher than your website, which means that the reality is a patient's never going to get to your website, or it's going to take them a long time to get to your website, and they may get to you through the online booking site. So again, there's no blanket advice. I think it's case by case. It depends on where your practice is, what you already have in place. But I would not discount them.
Thank you. Brett, so practitioners right now are looking at their books. Some practices are very busy, seeing a backlog. Some aren't, as they're restarting again. But I think one thing's for certain, in the not too distant future, there may be a lull in the books because of a change in economy, or perhaps even patients that have dropped off. Questions come through regarding reactivation. So I suppose that's reactivating a dormant patient, a patient that hasn't been in for a while. That may sort of have disease brewing but not even know about it. Yeah. Could you sort of explain briefly how a team would go about reactivating a patient?
Here's what we know about a patient who hasn't been into your practice for 18 months. Their level of relationship and trust with you is like down here, right? And now we've added this complexity of COVID-19, and it's going to be even worse. So reactivation is a tough job. It obviously has to be, done, but it's got to be done systematically. It's not something you just do. And not every team member is great at being able to do this. There's got to be a system around it, around regularly looking at communicating with those people. If you want to send, the most common way of reactivating patients is to send out a letter and say, hey, Dominic, we haven't seen you for 18 months. We'd love to see you, and then wait for you to contact me. But you haven't been here for 18 months. So what's the likelihood? Unless you're in pain, and that's the most motivated patient, but otherwise your motivational levels are down. So the question is, how do I motivate you to come back when you haven't been, if you haven't been anywhere else and you're not in pain? That's tricky. So that means looking at the wording of the communication, looking at how do we want to communicate to those patients. Is it via a letter? Is it via email? Is it via, because SMS is just too short. You know, what do we want to say in that communication? And then who's going to be the right person to pick up the phone every single week and get on the phone and not be desperate, begging for people to come back, but know that when you're calling that person to come back, you're giving them an opportunity to take care of their oral health. So that it's like, I'm calling this person as this is an opportunity to be taken care of. You know, that someone who hasn't been for 18 months, I promise you that it's like someone who hasn't done their tax for a couple of years. They know that they haven't, they know they haven't been to the dentist. Every time they drive past a dentist, they think about it. Every time they, you know, that someone else talks about the dentist, they know they haven't. And so what you're doing now is decreasing their level of guilt around that and saying, hey, we haven't said, but you've got to get on the phone and call that person with empathy, understanding, and see if they want to come back. And that takes training of whoever's going to be that person on the phone. It needs to be the right person. They need to be well trained.
And I think an excellent follow-on question is one that's just come through. A practice has noticed a high amount of FTA, so failed to attend or unable to attend at this time. What sort of techniques would you advise to decrease the incidence of those?
I've always sort of said, you know, the poor people at the front desk are the ones that are at the brunt of the FTA. But actually, I'm sorry to say this to the clinicians that are out there, but, you know, our belief is that the FTA began in the treatment room. Yeah. And it began in some way because the clinician wasn't able to communicate effectively, either to not develop relationship with the patient or to not be able to, I said it before, to bridge that gap between what the patient thinks they need and what the dentist thinks they need. So the patient ended up feeling like they were pushed into something or sold something that they didn't need, which they probably did, but somehow the communication wasn't quite right to get them to see what the dentist sees. So it's really then about how do we get the patient to see that, and how do we lift that level of motivation, you know, in those patients. And I really do believe it really does begin in the treatment room.
Sure. Thank you very much. Just quickly, Jesse, booking online and screening patients, is your practice, or are you advising your practice to call patients that are booked online at these times?
Sorry, mate, could you just repeat the question?
Patients that have booked online and having to screen them under level 1 restrictions, are you organising phone calls to those patients that have booked online before they come in?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're doing as well.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been an absolutely wonderful and enlightening discussion. Yes. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts, Carolyn, on tonight's discussion?
I guess the final soundbite would be make decisions well timed. You know, don't make knee-jerk decisions. Don't do scattergun approach marketing. You know, really think about what you're trying to say. Really think about the motivation of all your communication. You know your numbers, track your numbers, and have a plan.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Any final thoughts, mate?
A couple of thoughts. The first thing is that the practice you went into COVID with doesn't have to be the one you come out with. And so I think now's the opportunity to think clearly about what you want your future to look like, to start mapping out a plan of attack around that, to know what sort of metrics are going to be attached to that plan, cash flow, marketing, other metrics, of course, as we've discussed a lot tonight. But I think around that, just to also understand that success is personal. There's no one-size-fits-all definition of that either. And so for each practice owner, it's about creating a practice centre life that they love, and it's about trying to inject a bit more choice and fun into their life as well. And I think I'd like to see people come out of this in a much stronger position than they were before. So I think there's lots of opportunities on the horizon. I think it's about being alert to that and putting a plan in place for it.
Absolutely. And Brett, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesse and I are unabashedly biased around this, and we believe in the untapped potential in every practice, and this industry, I mean, this is my 18th year working with, in our industry and working in our business, and there's lots of challenges, and there always have been challenges, but this is probably the biggest one that we've faced, with every challenge, there's lots of opportunities as well. There has to be a willingness to grow and to evolve and to change and to adapt and to be agile. And we've got this big challenge now to do that, but it's a great opportunity.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to our panellists tonight. Again, it's been another valuable evening. The ADA are committed to supporting you throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. The ADA are also working with Carolyn, Jessie and Brett to put together a broad suite of resources for you. You'll receive an email next week to address those resources, and we look forward to your feedback on them as we hopefully get through all of this together. So until next time, stay safe and good night.